Welcome everybody to this new video. My name is Brian Veldman and I'm a Microsoft Azure and Security MVP. And today we are going to talk about Maester, which is a Microsoft Security Test Automation Framework. You can use this open source tool to test, validate and monitor your Microsoft security configuration. So instead, clicking through the portal and checking all the configs that you have and simply get all the results in a HTML format. So why will I use Maester? Well, Maester is an open source PowerShell based security test automation framework, as mentioned before, and it can help your organization validate, monitor and continuously test your tenant security configuration. So basically Maester has ready-made tests that you can run against your tenant. So based on the test results, I can improve the security posture of my organization by chasing this configuration. And there's also a possibility to constant monitor your environment using, for example, CI/CD pipelines. I'm also contributing to this open source PowerShell based security test automation framework, but you can do that as well. The more folks, how better this tool becomes. So one of the options is to run Maester locally. So the first step is to install the PowerShell modules. However, I'm skipping that step because I've already installed Maester, including Pester. So the first step will be to create a Maester test folder and install the Maester tests. So for that, I'm going to run line 4. It will create a folder. We can see it in the file explorer within my VS Code. Next, I will navigate to that folder in my terminal. Okay, so that's good. And right now we are going to install the Maester tests. And when we have the tests, we can connect using Maester and then invoke Maester. And after that, we can see that the Maester tests have been installed successfully. So when opening up the Maester test folder, we can see different tests based on their category. So for example, if we will look into the Azure category under the folder Maester, we can see the empty vault soft delete, which is kind of funny because I've written this test and it's part of the PowerShell module. So in that way, you can see that community efforts can help build a PowerShell module where other people can benefit from. So the next step is to connect to Maester and then invoke Maester. So we need to give Maester more context about our Microsoft tenant. And after connecting to our tenant, we can invoke Maester to do the tenant scan. So let me connect with Maester. I will be prompted on my other screen to sign in. Of course, I don't want to share this information because it's sensitive. However, when I'm connected, I will be back and we can invoke Maester. So right now you can see that I'm connected with Maester. Now it's time to hit the invoke Maester, which is line 9. I will just simply run it. And now it's time to grab a coffee and wait for the test results. And while waiting, you can also see the tests that are running against your tenant. So after grabbing my coffee, we can see the HTML report. We can see the total tests. And based on the total tests, we can see what is passed and what is failed. And as you can see for this test tenant, we have a lot of work to do. So for example, it saw that users detected as high risk shall be blocked. So currently, if a user is at a high risk, it will not be blocked. This can be a huge risk for an organization. Imagine your user is visiting malicious websites, a user is getting malware on his computer, and after that Enter ID will flag it as high risk. However, your security controls doesn't apply on that because the user is flagged as high risk. However, the user is not impacted by any policy. You can also see from the test which test passed. So for example, your tenant has one or more policies that block legacy authentication. So this is good. We don't allow any legacy authentication protocols that do not support MFA. So this basically means we pass the test and we reduce the impact of user credential theft. So my advice will be to take all the failed tests, check your configuration, and based on that, change it. And of course, you should be aware of the impact of that. So please do not run this test once and then never come back. Just run Maester frequently. And that's why I also recommend it in the first place to use CI/CD pipelines. You can decide on which categories I want to focus. So for example, if I want to harden my Active Directory, that category can be good. However, if you want to see Active Directory results, you should also connect to the Active Directory. Otherwise, you don't have any results because the data isn't there. For example, I would like to focus on Intune. So that's why I'm selecting the Maester Intune category. And based on that, I can decide, okay, this is my Intune config and I would like to know more about the ASR rules. So basically it says there are no endpoint security attack service reduction policies found in Intune. And the advice here is to create an ASR policy under the endpoint security attack service reduction. So in this case, I would recommend to enable attack service reduction policies in audit mode. You should always test your new security policies in an audit mode. And based on the data, you can decide, okay, this is a false positive or it's indeed malicious and we should block this. So as you guys saw, the default Maester tests are super powerful. I've showed you just a couple of the tests. However, because Maester is an open source PowerShell module, you can also write your own custom tests. I've created a test SharePoint Online function which just checks on if guests are allowed to share items that they don't own. So for example, I'm sharing a file with you as a guest in my organization, and based on that access, you can access the file, and after that you decide to share that file with another user. For example, somebody you know from another organization, even if I don't know. So this can be a huge risk for your organization. External users that are resharing your file without you even knowing. So this is just an example of a custom test I wrote. And how about Maester for MSPs? So for example, you as a service provider can create a DevOps pipeline, create the service connections to your customers' tenants, and based on that you can fetch the data, create the HTML reports, and get a single overview, all the tenants in one dashboard. So as you can see in this picture, one scan was based for demo and one scan was based for production, and as you can see, I can switch between them in one single HTML report. So this was it. I hope you liked the video. Let me know if you already experimented with Maester. If not, please go ahead and use this tool. It's very nice. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. If you liked the video, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe below, and thanks for the massive support on my videos. I really appreciate that, and I hope to see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.